Welcome everyone to our webinar on the 2024 annual meeting. It is a pleasure to have such a large turnout in preparation for the submission deadline of July 31st, 11:59 p.m. Pacific time. We welcome you and the work that you are doing to prepare for the annual meeting, where we started a few minutes late, and we'll try to stick within an hour from this start time, in part because we had a large turnout and we wanted to be sure that the participants that signed up were able to come in the door. So we welcome you. I am Felice Levine, Executive Director, and I'm joined by Mary Piper Waters, Assistant Director of Meetings. We've called this webinar Debunking the Myths About Paper, Poster, and Roundtable Sessions and More. Do you want to put that first slide up for us? And we emphasize the and more because we really want to be available to discuss with you the issues most important to you as you work through your submission. So welcome one and all. Next slide. We only have 3 and they'll be posted. I've introduced myself. Mary, you want to say a few words?
Yeah, I'm Mary Piper Waters. I'm the Assistant Director of Meetings, and we are happy that the submission system is open, and we look forward to everybody joining us either virtually or in Philadelphia next April.
So one thing to think about when you think about that deadline is please don't wait till 11:59 p.m. Start pacing yourself through the weekend and through the 31st. We have multiple servers going with all academic, but there's only so much bandwidth, even with a great deal of bandwidth. We've outlined a number of topics that we'll show you with the agenda, but we're joined by Kendra McGee, Senior Meetings Manager, who is taking note of the Q&A, and Tony Pauls at my immediate left. I point to because I can see him, but he will be your voice, and we'll do the voice throughout. We don't want to necessarily hold back. We really want it to be as interactive and collaborative as we can, as we're maybe approaching, I can't quite see the numbers, but it looks like over 800. You post that Q&A function, but we'll try to both answer in Q&A, but also bring your questions to the fore. So let's just give you a overview of the agenda, and I think we'll start. Next slide. You do. Thanks. So, as you know, I hope you know from reading the call for submissions, we have a dual component annual meeting. We have a dual component annual meeting from the outset. For the 2022 annual meeting, we had thought that for 2022 that COVID would be behind us, and that annual meeting call was only place-based in San Diego, and as many of you know, we backfilled to provide an opportunity for a virtual component. But for 2023, when we released the call, as we did this year, we planned both components. Both components, not just because of the our emergence from the pandemic, but as we've learned to be some of the excitement that flows from a worldwide virtual meeting and the opportunities that it provides as a exciting component of the meeting, as we plan as well for Philadelphia. The space between the 2 meetings, these 2 components, is more proximal, and you will indeed start by as you submit your as you prepare your submission, you will start by making that selection. Let me also emphasize that Mary will talk a little bit about preparing paper submissions, but while the same paper or the same session submission can only be submitted to one component, if you plan to be in Philadelphia and submit a paper or a part of a session in Philadelphia, and plan to submit a paper or a session for the virtual component, no duplicative submission, just like no duplicative submission to a journal, but you can choose to participate in both components of the meeting. And you can see that the dates permit a span of about 10-11 days before the end of the second week for the virtual component. Mary, do you want to kind of overview the preparing paper submission?
Yeah, so as you're going through the system, the first question will be asking if you're accepted to the meeting, whether or not, if you are accepted, then you will need to register for the meeting. And then it will go through the system and you will choose what section, division, section, or SIG you would like to submit to. And then the next thing will pop up is if you want to submit to a paper or a session, and what type of session you would like to submit. And once you get to the next step, that's when it will ask you whether or not you wanted presentation preferences, place-based or virtual. But once you choose it and submit, and the submission deadline has been completed, you will not be able to switch from virtual to place-based or vice versa. So just making that statement right now. Go back to please.
So the other things that you may or may not focus on when you read the call for submissions is that two things. Were your paper to be selected for the virtual meeting, your paper will only be in a roundtable or paper session. There will not be poster sessions for the virtual component. All poster sessions now for the third year will be on the increasingly popular, I should say, popular no doubt, because the poster session displayed in the exhibit halls have been packed with not only posters, but with attendees. All posters are presentations through an electronic poster board. We are adding a component to the meeting this year, and that is we will be scheduling e-lightning brief ed talks for those of you who select to participate in that component. It's an election in the submission. We won't be able to select all who might wish to participate if there's a very large number, but you will not be placed for an e-lightning talk that will run 3 to 5 minutes with brief Q&As. We will be running that throughout the meeting, throughout all 4 days, except for when we have plenary sessions like the award ceremony or the presidential address and so forth. So take note of that. It's a very nice opportunity to draw people into your own presentation of your work, in addition to those who come to your poster presentation. As I've just alluded to, the mode of paper presentations and place-based and virtual components are not quite identical this year insofar as there is no poster presentation of papers in the virtual meeting. So all submissions of papers for the virtual component will either be in paper sessions or roundtables. And as we hope you experienced this year in attending, and we had a nice turnout of attendees at the virtual component of the meeting, a paper presentation has more each are Zoom sessions. A paper presentation has the more typical formal presentation with or without a discussion at the end and opening for questions. Some chairs entertain questions in between, some not, but it's a Zoom session. The roundtable sessions, each one is a Zoom session, and each one is a brief opportunity to interact with each other, guided by a chair, and those who attend also then can pose questions, raise questions, and participate in what I might loosely call more of a seminar mode than a lecture and Q&A mode that's more typical of paper sessions. That is the case with place-based or virtual. The only difference between a roundtable that is place-based is that you are in a roundtable distanced between tables, and we've increasingly distanced that since the 2022 annual meeting. In a roundtable that's virtual, you're essentially in a single Zoom room, not a breakout session. So the major takeaway here is that the electronic poster presentation sessions are only place-based in Philadelphia with an e-lightning opportunity, and the roundtable and paper sessions virtually are all Zoom, separate Zoom sessions, and really model what we hope will be the way you model the descriptions of those two components for your paper to be placed in one or the other, or in the case of a poster, the third component.
I think we have quite a few questions.
Tony.
Yes. A couple people have asked about the price to register in person versus virtual.
There is, as there has been, a price differential or a registration fee differential. We have held fixed the virtual registration fee since 2021. That will be the fees will be announced shortly, but that fee will be going up, as will the place-based submission fees. For those of you envisioning, or perhaps after several years you envision that a virtual meeting the virtual component is lower in cost. The virtual component has its own platform, its own site licenses for every Zoom session, and its own staffing of every session in order to ensure that those sessions go well and effectively. So the cost to the virtual component of the meeting is quite high, and the fees are being adjusted as the costs for a place-based meeting have become quite high as well. Those will be announced I'll say before the end of the membership year, which is September 30th, and we're working through some of the details of that cost registration fee.
The registration for the meeting will open in December.
Yeah, registration will open in December, and I didn't look at the exact calendar. I think it's posted somewhere, but the announcement of acceptance is
November 10th.
Yeah, November 10th. You said that. So and that would so registration for both components opens up on in December.
All right. We have a question about what is more likely to be accepted, in person or virtual, and then which is more likely to be accepted in each of those, a paper or a roundtable submission.
a very good question. I would say that that the overall acceptance is probably the same. We haven't had as long a history of virtual meetings versus place-based meetings. So we haven't examined those statistics. They vary by unit, but overall acceptances for the annual meeting run somewhere in the 45–47%. Overall for the meeting, it doesn't vary too much by unit, but this is kind of getting to the myth question. Your paper is accepted as a quality paper based on the merits of the paper. The fact that your paper, and that you choose how you wish to present. You can choose to present in a paper session because you think that that's the best motif for this stage in the development of your work. You can choose to present in a roundtable session because you're at a point in which you would like to be more interactive with others and less stepping back and presenting the whole or the 10-minute or 8 to 10-minute version. Or you would prefer to be quite visual in showing your findings or the early stages of the development of this research and where it stands. And it is the mode of presentation that you that should lead you to select one or the other or the third. There's been an implicit, which is more than anything, one of the reasons for this being a separate topic, an implicit sense that there's a status hierarchy, that somehow a paper session is viewed more valuably. When your acceptance goes out, your paper is accepted as an accepted paper. So choose the modality. I suppose if you have no preference about the modality and you're equally as comfortable with a poster session as a roundtable or a paper session, you can select all three. But if you much prefer to interact dynamically, led by a discussion leader, then have your 8 minutes of formal presentation, maybe a discussant, if there's a discussant, and maybe time for Q&A. If that's your preferred modality, select it, but don't feel you need to select it because your paper will be accepted with anything that's an implicit higher acceptance by the association. I think that it's hard for us to break these status norms that have dominated fields like AERA for many years, but the best way to transcend those myths is for you to choose how you would prefer to present and for you to opt for that mode of presentation. In 2010, when these reforms were introduced, it removed from program chairs and co-chairs the option of putting persons in the type. It's you who choose how you want to present, and the acceptance letter accepts the paper as if they are identical. So I think that's probably the best way to answer the question, because the number of roundtable sessions and the number of poster presentations may vary, and we do not examine success rates in each component separately.
We have a couple of questions about whether the same paper can be submitted to more than one division and or SIG.
And the answer is no. And you should be attentive to that. The same paper can be submitted to 2 units. And by extrapolation, that's been longstanding policy of AERA and almost every scholarly society with which we are familiar. And it's the same premise that says that you can submit the same paper to place-based and virtual. You can submit different papers and meaningfully different papers to different units. So if, for example, your there's a methodological innovation in the use of qualitative analysis with video recordings that may be particularly appropriate for the methodology, qualitative method section of Division D, but yet your paper itself, or a second paper, is on early childhood development of social skills, particularly appropriate for the developmental section of E, and you've got two papers based on the same piece of research, but for very different sets of findings, then you certainly could submit two papers and are encouraged to do so, but you can't submit the same paper to more than one unit. All right.
So someone asked whether whether submissions are papers that are published ready, or can these be proposals that are completed works by the time of the conference?
They don't have to be published ready. Indeed, we hope that when I say the we here, the collective scholarly community as sort of a raison d'etre for having annual meetings, that it's an opportunity to interact around work. Some are pretty far along and ready to submit for publication, and that's fine. The initial submission has to be for work that's done. It should not be for a plan to do data collection in November or February. It should be for work that's done, but that so that the submission, as you will see, we call it a paper submission, not a paper proposal. It should have all of the elements of a paper, but during the 6 months between now and the annual meeting, that's an opportunity to do further analyses, clarifications. In some subfields of our field, the initial submission is pretty much the final paper, and that's fine too. Others do further work and then upload their final paper, I think roughly 3 weeks before the annual meeting, and that can be at various stages. It does not need to be polished and ready to go to a journal. Some may indeed have begun the submission process to a journal. The plus of the annual meeting is to be able to get some additional feedback that that strengthens your ultimate submission to a journal or a chapter in a book as part of the knowledge production cycle. That's very much the ethos of submitting a paper, having a paper accepted, continuing to work on that work, submitting a more final and refined paper to further refine it based on the annual meeting, unless it's ready to go. And if it's ready to go, fine. And don't feel constrained by the level of finality of the paper.
We have a question about whether there's a limit on the number of papers that can be submitted.
Actually, I think in principle, there's a limit to the number.
There's a limit on participation.
There's limit on participations. I think as long as it's distinct papers, there's not a limit on what you could submit. There's a limit on participations. I think there's but I suppose worry about that after you get your acceptances.
We have a few questions about whether people can submit for AERA and another conference with the same paper at the same time.
The same paper should not be presented at the same, I'll say the same identical paper. And I mean truly meaningfully identical paper should not be submitted to conferences at the same time. The same research may take different forms that would lead you to presenting at 2 different meetings. So it could be that you're doing a study of parental influence on political attitudes, and you might submit that paper to, well, they're at different times of year, but let's skip that nuance, to the political psychology session of the American Political Science Association, and you're focusing on political attitudes and values, and one of the contingencies might be parents, it might be school, it might be community. It might be that you would be then submitting a similar paper to early childhood development, but you would be building it upon a somewhat different conceptual framework. You might be presenting different findings or looking at that through different lenses. These are kind of long-standing traditions to reach different audiences and communities of scholars, but like submitting to two journals, it's a judgment call. If you're essentially wrapping the same paper with two different cover sheets, then it is discouraged, because each meeting is to have presented original work. It's in our call and almost every other call involves peer-reviewed annual meeting submissions, that the same work should not have its first airing, as it were, and multiple meetings. But there are different aspects of work that are based on some of the same data or some of the same findings, as they might even with articles. And I think our ethics code and the true meaning of duplicate submission should drive your use of your own sense of ethical values and anchoring as enunciated in our ethics code in our call and the call of other scholarly meetings.
We have a few questions about word limits for submissions, whether all submissions are limited to 2,000 words, and then whether the updated papers, the final papers that are uploaded, can be more than 2,000 words.
I think the answer is yes, yes. You are limited, and we want to adhere to that limit, and the final paper can be can exceed that limit. And I think the 2,000 words excludes.
It excludes the title and your references
And your tables and figures.
in your tables and figures, but it does include your abstract.
Right, so it's the word. So it's not to say a picture can suffice to communicate 1,000 words, but sometimes it can, and that transcends methods. A visual can be very significant in conveying the work and your result.
Few people have asked whether their submissions have to be tied directly to the annual meeting theme.
Good question. The theme is important, and the theme is important to define presidential sessions, which are essentially 37 or so, plus or minus. The theme, as you will see in the mini calls of divisions, are typically papers that address the theme, are certainly welcome, but we are a scholarly field with many persons working on many issues that may or may not be theme related. I think the theme this year is one that cuts across many of our communities of scholars, and as is undoubtedly true other years as well, and endemically might be part of papers, but the open submission is an open submission for the scholarly arenas that embrace our field as it is, our field as it is moving toward arenas of inquiry that may not even see themselves as AERA insiders, where their work would have a would help to push and instigate and disrupt our thinking. And that work, that is your work, is welcome and is not necessarily at all fee related. That's why there's the open submission. The open submission is well better than 95 to 98% of the work presented at the annual meeting. If not more.
Two people raised hand. You want me to allow them to speak?
Sure, please. And please say, if you would mind introducing yourself and your affiliation.
Jacqueline Albert, you are allowed to speak now. Please speak if you still have a question.
Next.
All right. John Webb, you are allowed to speak now. You can speak. Imani Wallace, you are allowed to speak now.
Please unmute yourself.
Hi.
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 Hello.
Hello,
Yes.
go ahead.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes, please.
Good. Yeah. My name is
I will
John.
mute myself because it appears someone else is speaking.
Okay. My name is John Peter Wapa. I'm a PhD candidate with EMU, Cyprus. I'm doing my PhD in English language teaching. So my question is a kind of appeal to people from low income countries, the poor. The countries with the countries with poor economy, where the registration for publication with AERA is a bit high. Is there any way the AERA, the association, can help such candidates that are sending papers to AERA assist? Thank you.
Hi, may I ask my question?
Yeah,
Yeah.
let me try to respond to that, and then you could ask your question. I think we have had, and units have webinars on the development of paper submissions, and this is an effort at some of those components. We appreciate and understand and value the need to provide support and assistance and webinars early in the stage of preparing a paper submission to widen the net, whether it's across institutions within the United States or career stages or around the world, Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere, East and West. I think at this point in the process, and we'll try to respond to that question after submissions and provide more understanding. At this point in the process, we would not be able to provide any specific guidance on papers that you're in the process of preparing. There are some excellent webinars that have some recordings that divisions and SIGs have sponsored. If you email the annual meeting box, and we'll be showing you that email, we may be able to point you to some of those videos. At least one I can think of is available, and that was done last week. It was and may be helpful for you in crafting your submission. And let me just move to that second question that was being framed, and I wanted to answer the first. Would you state your question? Do you remember who that was?
Imani Wallace.
No.
Yes, the question.
No, we did that question. No, I think.
Yes, hi, this is Imani Wallace.
Okay.
I actually I actually have 3 questions. I put them all in the chat, but I'll just ask.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, okay, sorry, they muted me. Okay, so the first one was actually, I wanted to ask more about the IRB requirement that's listed in the call for proposals. So for example, if I've done research with human subjects and I have explicit proof, like signed contracts and documents from my subjects as well as their parents, giving me permission to collect data from them, will that suffice if I haven't received the IRB approval yet?
If you haven't, just put that in the box, okay? If there's a comment box, just say, no IRB approval in process, and that you've already received parental and children consent, okay?
Okay, and
That
that'll
won't
be,
ding you, we just need the information of where
Okay.
you are.
okay.
And that's why we
yeah,
have the
just want-
comment box. Yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure. And then the second question is it possible to indicate in your submission that you are open to another modality if the committee thinks that the modality selected isn't the right format? So for example, if I submit for a paper submission, but could I also indicate that I'd be open to a roundtable session if that will be a determining factor for the
Yes,
committee?
you can pick more than one, so just go ahead, although they're not rank ordered, but just select paper and roundtable.
Okay, all right, awesome. And then the last question is actually, if my submission is for a division, is it okay to indicate what SIGs are closely affiliated with my research and state that either in the submission or upon acceptance? Does that make a difference? Does that matter at all? If I mention that these SIGs are like affiliated with this research and, you know, it could have been submitted to either, but I chose a division.
Yeah, choose your best fit. We don't have a location. Sometimes if something seems well out of scope for a SIG or a division and the program chairs think it's better that it fit elsewhere, it would have a better shot before review, that there's a little bit of movement, but that's really the prerogative of the chair to help the submissions. And I would say that's, you know, really kind of outliers from this place. So give it your best shot in your choice, but you can only choose one.
Okay, awesome. So maybe I could like indicate it in the comment box or something, and like, you know, people could like, they can look at it and just see if that even makes sense or not. I mean, if not, I just wanted to put it out there to make
For
sure
the
people are
paper
open to it.
submissions, I don't know if there's an open comment box. I think not for other units.
There's additional information.
I suppose you can put it there. Yeah, you could put it in under additional information. Whether the
Okay.
peer reviewers look at it at that level of detail on that kind of thing. At that point, it's not going to be transferred once the peer review process starts. Was there another?
Yes, Ariel Bowles, you are allowed to speak now.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. My name is Ariel Borns. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm curious about the process or what the options are for submitting a fully formed panel instead of just an individual paper.
Yeah. So we go back and add the agenda up. We're going to talk a little bit about session submissions. And so the session submissions, so the call for submissions are for paper submissions and session submissions. So you will see or perhaps have seen already, particularly if you're thinking the 31st, you will see the elements of what you need to put in a paper submission. There are, Brigitte, you want to put the slide back on for the webinar agenda to join with us? There are a few pointers that I think are important generally. If you are involved in being part of a session submission, or you are trying to organize one, if it should be the work of a team, even if multi-institutional team or the investigators or collaborators span more than one institution or even more than one project, be sure, and you will see this explicitly, be sure that there's another voice, that it's not a friends and family session, that you've got commentators or a discussant or someone who will bring in additional thoughts and ideas other than a team. If there are sometimes session submissions are essentially panelists talking to some larger question or set of issues. But sometimes it's a series of presentations around different research from different scholars or communities of scholars or policy persons. If that's the case, and it is a commentary paper, be sure the commentary paper is, which are shorter in their requirements. So what is the length of the commentary? 500 words for the commentary paper. Be sure it kind of covers a sense of what the presentation is about. While it's an abstract of sorts, you want to be sure that the commentary papers for a session submission have the titles, have the authors, have the presenting author designated, and that it communicates well, how the commentary paper fits into the goals, the overall goals of the session. There is also a session motif called a structured poster session. So one can submit a organized structured poster session. Some are created by units, but some come in over the open submission. There will not be any structured poster sessions in the virtual component of the meeting. A little hard virtually to walk around and see electronic posters, but a very important reform this year or addition this year is that AERA will be providing electronic poster boards for the structured poster sessions that are in essentially large session groups. And that will therefore be an opportunity for presentations that are electronic poster presentations around a topic or theme. And I think they max at 15. 50, is it 15? I think it's okay. Kendra, can you check and post that? I think it's 15 posters for a structured poster session.
Yes.
And that's a section motif, but those will be in Philadelphia. And we got some expression of interest about using the electronic poster boards there as well. It's not without its cost increases to have more electronic monitors, but we're going to do it. We think that'll make for more dynamic structured poster session. So hopefully that sort of addresses your session submission question. Tony, what do you say?
We have a few questions about whether the submissions deadline will be extended.
I'm biting my fingernails, but I'm going to say it isn't, so get ready. We really want to be able to ensure, remember that, well, you may not remember depending upon your career stage, but we introduced a much stronger peer review process in 2010. Reviewers are selected by their units from volunteers. They're created into panels so that there aren't as many reviewers as papers doing only one, which better normalizes and calibrates reviewing and results in a high quality review. But these reviewers have volunteered to review in August. And if we extend the deadline, we're asking people who volunteered or then were invited to peer review in a certain span of time in their own career obligations to push that back. And when you push that back into September, it's a tough call. So we're sticking with the deadline of July 31st, which has been the dominant norm, recognizing that due to COVID in particular, in the last 3 years, we extended the deadline, but we're sticking with July 31st.
People have asked whether abstracts are counted in the 2,000 word limit?
Sorry, no, they are not counted in 2,000 word limit. It is the 120 word abstract and then 2,000 word paper.
We get a very high participation rate in the online paper repository, which then becomes an open access product. I think we're up to, maybe up to 70% of papers, maybe even higher, because not commentary papers may not evolve into papers that when we put in the paper repository, but they can be. And many are. It's a true asset for your paper. It is not considered a final publication by AERA. That work will be further refined and submitted to however you choose to submit it. But it makes your work searchable and findable worldwide. Those papers in the paper repository. And you can look at the paper repository on our website from prior years. Have a DOI, so it provides you with a much more citable and searchable product, even beyond those who go into the repository. And then also, and that's a check off in submission. So we've just gone back and said, if you want to be in the repository from 2023 and you didn't check it off, although most did check it off, you still can do so, and you need to upload your, go back and check it off and upload your paper by, I think, August 10th. But doing it at the front end, you still will have until after the annual meeting to clean up the grammar or any feedback that you've gotten. The other option that is quite distinct is to prepare your presentation, whatever that presentation might be, or however you want to present it. It's the presentation, not the paper, in the iPresentation gallery. You'll be invited to do so, assuming an accepted paper or commentary paper. You'll be invited to do so in January, and anyone who has an accepted poster must do so. That's the mode of presentation through the monitor, is to have your paper in the iPresentation gallery. That too becomes an open access product, and all of those presentations as well have a DOI that's separate from your paper DOI, digital object identifier, which is the universal, one of the major universal identifier that ensures that the finding of your work doesn't decay as websites decay. And that's a very valuable, citable option, and both options are available. The online paper repository, check it off once you, as you're going through the submission. The iPresentation gallery, you'll be invited to participate in early January.
Still have 5 people raised hand.
Okay,
Raising hands.
Tony, what do you say?
A couple of people have asked you to speak briefly about workshop presentations.
Workshop presentations, let me just ask so you can post your answer. Is that if that's in the context of a workshop submission, and let me assume it is, because we're not talking about, assuming we're not talking about pre-day workshops that are held by divisions and SIGs and that are mentoring opportunities. And I'm assuming we're not talking about workshops of the professional development courses. So the workshop submissions that are a type of submission are aiming to be educative sessions for those who attend. They can vary from learning in a nascent area or potential breakthrough issues in, let's say, the normal science or scholarship of our field. They could be methodologically drawn. Those are submissions that link to the substantive topics or breadth of topics or maybe even nascent areas within a division or a SIG that need further fostering, but those modes of presentation are really determined by the organizer in preparing that session. So if you've been invited to be a participant in a workshop and you're wondering what the heck does that mean, it really can vary quite a bit from your having, small segments on different topics where you might bring some particular expertise or experience, or really being part of a kind of a co-faculty or instructional group around an issue. So there isn't an AERA mindset about what a workshop presenter does.
All right, we have a question about whether symposia will be both place-based and virtual.
Yes, all session submissions are, which include perhaps even the dominant type are symposia. All session submissions can opt for place-based or virtual. The only session submission type that we don't have in the virtual component is the structured poster session. Every other type, even performance. We even had performances that were done, which is the submission type, not I won't say typical, but frequently part of Division B and some of our SIGs. That we've had performances, as you all undoubtedly watch performances at home to take a break. All submission types other than the structured poster sessions are submitted to and are welcome for the virtual as well as place-based.
Someone says they're not sure which division or SIG best fits their topic. Should they reach out to?
Reach out to the program chair or co-chairs quickly. Given the date, you could reach out to both of them if it's sort of two divisions or a section in a division. Send a listed chair an email and say you're kind of struggling with where this best might land.
All right, we have a follow-up question. Are footnotes considered part of the 2,000 word limit?
No.
We're not an overly note and footnote noted field. Usually if it's important, it's incorporated into the text, but I think it's not the category.
Right.
And a few people have asked, when will acceptances go out?
Acceptance is still out November 10th.
Yes, November 10th.
Yep.
There's some people raising.
Yeah, so we'll hit a few more. I said we'd run an hour from when we opened shop here, so we welcome your participation and your engagement. And
Kim Sedai, you are allowed to speak now.
Yeah, my name is Kim Sedai. I'm a doctoral student at University of Albany SUNY. I'm in the phase of defending my proposal. I have a quick question. You might have answered that. I'm sorry for that. So my question was about the pilot study. I completed my pilot study with the approval of the IRB. Can I present my pilot study?
can you present your pilot study?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Unless there's something else precluded in permissions, you can present a pilot study as your, the results of your preliminary research.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Sure. Oh, congratulations on finishing.
Okay.
Lisa Rivera.
Hello, thank you for your session today. I'm a recent graduate from a doctoral program in organizational development from Fielding Graduate University. A quick question on, is there overall scope of what types of studies will be admitted for each session? So for example, focus on quantitative or qualitative studies or mixed methods?
There is no limit. We are ARA, and I hope all fields of science emulate. Our commitment is to a diversity of methods appropriate to the questions driving the work. And there is no disproportionality or proportionality allocated across not just that cut of methods, but whether it's simulations, experiments, surveys, use of extant data, the full spectrum of methodologies are welcome as linked to and appropriate for the questions driving the study conceptually and theoretically. That helps?
Thank you. Yes.
Salomon Rodesno.
Hi there. My name is Solomon, and I'm a third-year doctoral student at Michigan State University. Thanks for this session. And my question is about the roundtables. Do you all assemble a group for us, or is that something that we have to come in already prepared? This comes also because this would be my first AERA, and I don't know.
Okay, good question. Now, if all the paper submissions come in as individual papers, and assuming that the work is potentially or would be accepted, the program committees for each unit organize those accepted papers into paper sessions or roundtable sessions. You don't need to find your other co-roundtable papers. You're submitting a single paper, and then the organizers seek to organize roundtables, whether it could be around similar sets of conceptual issues or empirical domains or even methodological challenges, and paper sessions similarly. So the paper submissions are organized into sessions, including poster sessions by the program committees of each unit.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Or else you'd really have a formidable task if you needed to buy the other papers for later. So good luck, and we welcome you to Philadelphia. We do have, assuming that you're aiming for Philadelphia, I guess we should add that component to the virtual meeting, but we do have a opening session early the morning of day 1 that is for new members and first-time attendees, and we had quite a large turnout, so it's a nice opportunity to also meet some newcomers at the annual meeting.
Fantastic. Gracias.
Marla. Yeah. Marla.
Hi, this is Kendra. Please, can you answer the question about financial support specifically for participants from lower economic nations?
The International Relations Committee has a allocation of funds that is with a priority given to those with accepted participations from low income economies or those with resources that are more scarce. So that would be the primary option. There are other forms of support that are allocated through divisions and SIGs, but the primary AERA allocation for non-US participants with an emphasis of those in low-income economies and those earlier in career those with acceptances, after the acceptances go out, then receive an email through our staff leaders, Lauren Diane Hill, who's Associate Executive Director, leads that process with the International Relations Committee. And so that option goes to those who have accepted acceptances. And there'll be other postings. I don't want to fully elaborate on them, but there are other postings of opportunities for support for those with accepted papers, particularly those graduate students and early career scholars. Although the one dedicated to the international acceptances is the fund provided to the International Relations Committee.
Marla, if you still have question, you can ask. Olga,
I don't have a question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Please.
Hi, so my name is Olga Fellows. I'm from Brock University in Canada, Ontario. And I, first of all, wanted to thank you for this initiative. I think it's very important, especially for people who are submitting their work for the first time. I've been involved with AERA for, I think, more than 10 years now. And I've spoken with you, Phyllis, for a few times. I don't know whether you remember. Anyways, my question circles back to the online paper repository. I have I've been thinking about this option of allowing papers that are presented at AERA to be linked to Google Scholar. That will make it more easily retrievable. I think there is a prestige with presenting with AERA, and I just, based on my personal experience and also this nature of the fact that if something is easily retrievable, it is also more easily citable, and going to the paper repository adds a step that many people would say, you know what, no, we know for a fact that people use Google Scholar a lot. So I wonder whether that can be addressed perhaps in the future. And I like the idea of something you mentioned before about the ID number for the papers, but again, easy retrieval is what I'm basically asking about.
Yeah,
Thank
no,
you.
it's a really good question. The inclusion of the DOI should actually transcend having to go to the repository, because that becomes scrapable as linked in the World Wide Web through the DOI and the topical issues or names of authors, etc. So the introduction of the DOI for the online paper repository or for the AERA presentations should make it findable by virtue of the use of the digital object identifier. You are also raising a good point, and I want to say additional point, that therefore is it findable through Google Scholar? And I'll feed that question back to our Director of Publications to see what makes that tick, because he works in that space of our scholarly communications, and with Tony, we'll try to answer how it is Google Scholars finds us and whether it's findable. I can tell you we were recently looking at and have a if I'm remembering correctly, Tony, a story in Highlights coming out this month about ERIC, which is the U.S. Department of Education's repository of publications, and I was impressed with in the last 6 months, because they give us reports every 6 months. Am I citing this right? That numbers of papers from our online paper repository were listed as having a lot of hits. So I think this DOI and scrapability finds the repository. Yes, it's nice to go into the repository, and we welcome users doing so. As with any other repository, you can then put in your own search terms and author names and find lots of stuff. But it's not the only way of discoverability. Now that we've both added, and I believe we backfilled DOIs for several years. But it's a good question, and I'd like to explore further the Google Scholar identification of our work. It might be there, but if there's something one does, I don't know the answer, but we would like to find that out.
Related to this, we have a question about whether having a paper in the online repository will hinder it being accepted for publication by a journal.
AERA explicitly says that that authors hold the copyright, but we do not consider this a publication. We are not the only quote unquote working paper series running across areas. Actually, I think the American Anthropological Association has something for many, many years. The National Bureau of Economics Research has had working papers. We don't consider it a publication, and it isn't the final work. We can't speak to what some journal publishers somewhere might do. We haven't received any reports that either our repository or any other that operates with the same principles precludes publication elsewhere, and I can assure you it does not preclude publication in AERA's literature.
Marla, if you are still there, you can ask question. Lauren Marisa.
Hi, yes, can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
So I asked a question in the chat, but unfortunately, I think it may be the wrong arena for the question, but you'll let me know.
Okay.
I am it looks like I'm done talking. I'm getting a message. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we have done.
Okay. So I am a doctoral student as well, and I read about research in progress papers being able to be submitted. Is the deadline on the 31st for research in progress as well, or is there a separate deadline for graduate students wanting to submit those?
Yeah, and I meant to get a posting, and I on the graduate student the council listserv to get the word out. The research in progress submissions that we introduced last year are for work that are not ready for submission as papers for July. They're not, the work is still in progress. Paper submissions can be for preliminary work, but need to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. If you're in the middle of launching a project right at this point and you're not at a stage where the work is submittable by the July 31st deadline, then we introduced that modality last year for the 2023 annual meeting. And it really came from, if I can just briefly tell you, from the Graduate Student Council retreat. And Lori Diane Hill, Associate Executive Director, and I were asked to facilitate that retreat. And it was riveting in all kinds of ways, but including council members from the Graduate Student Council saying, you know, it's one thing to attend a meeting when you haven't yet have work right for submission, but it's another thing to have an opportunity to talk about it. And I said I'd give it thought, and I did. And then this Graduate Student Council meets monthly. And in September, I shared this idea for research in progress. So the research in progress deadline might be a little bit earlier than we did last year because it was a new idea that we tried experimentally. We're going to continue it experimentally this year. I would think the deadline has not yet been identified. It might be earlier in October than later in October, but it is really for work that is not right yet for submission. The student from MSU who, doctoral student from MSU who said, I completed my pilot and that work is completed, can I submit that? That's for completed work and that's appropriate for a paper submission. If you or he said, I've got a project that I'm about to launch and I'm going to be doing a preliminary observations in August and September. I can't yet submit for a meta-analysis on the literature. I can't yet submit, but I think, or you think to yourself that when the deadline is announced, you've got then a paper. Again, it can't be for proposed work, but it needs to be for work in progress, although that work doesn't need to be completed. And we are repeating that this year. We don't have a deadline yet, and I would say we'll put that in highlights, if not August, in the September issue of highlights.
Bahari Gawami. You are allowed to speak.
All right, well, we'll take one more last question, because I said we'd run an hour and I want to be attentive to that.
Go ahead, Bahari. Muhammad.
Yes. Hello, do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Thank you for doing this. I'm Mohammed Al-Qahtani, fourth year's PhD students at the University of South Florida. My question, I put it in the chat, but I'm not sure. And I know you talked about that a bit. So if my paper got accepted in other conference, a roundtable, will I be able to submit it for AERA as a paper? And thank you.
Let me ask you one question. When is that roundtable? Did you do this roundtable or it's forthcoming?
Not yet. I did not hear the decision yet.
Oh, yeah. If it is the same paper,
please take more of it.
wait a minute. If it's the same paper, you can't submit the same paper to two different scholarly meetings. If it's based on the same research and you're submitting two different papers, a different paper based on the same research, you can submit, but the same paper, it essentially has the same conceptual framework, questions, data, or results. If you submitted it to, let me just say, Association for the Study of Higher Education that meets in November, you can't take that same paper and submit it to AERA for April.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there another question that was coming to the fore?
Mohammed Al-Qahtani, if you're still there, you can ask question.
I think I just did.
Mohammed, but it was Bahar.
There seemed to be another voice, and we'll entertain that one, and then we'll wish everyone well.
Okay, then Bahari Gawami.
Yes.
Go ahead, please.
No.
Do you have a question?
And be later.
Hi, this is Andy Layton from Michigan State, past chair of the Graduate Student Council. Hi, everyone. I just had a quick question. I just wanted to know if you can talk a little bit about what is the difference between submitting for a division and submitting for a workshop?
Andy, I'm not sure what you mean by submitting for a workshop.
If I wanted to submit for a paper, a poster, or roundtable session, what's the difference between those three modalities compared to a division submission?
A division submission in comparison to a SIG submission?
So
Or-
if you
Yeah, give me 2 more sentences there.
sorry about that. Well, submitting for just for a regular roundtable compared to submitting for a division.
Well, when you submit to a division or a SIG, your submission is a paper submission. And then you can elect, depending upon your preference and how you most would like to present. You can select that you would want this paper presented in a roundtable, or you would want it in a poster session or a paper session. You can select all or one or two. If you have a modality preference for two, select those two. If you have a strong preference for one and would rather not present if accepted in the other two, that's your choice. If you are comfortable and would be equally as pleased to use any of those three modalities, you can select all three, but you're only indicating to the program committee for that unit. And it's the same process whether it's a division or a SIG. There's no variation in the process of your making a choice, but you're submitting a paper. And as you're submitting a paper, you will see a drop-down screen once you pick your unit. And you've picked whether you want to be virtual or place-based, you see a drop-down screen that will say what your preferred mode of presentation is. And then you choose whether it's only paper, only roundtable, only poster, or any combination up to 3.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I wasn't sure where the workshop concept fit into that, so I
think that's just Andy language for session. That's all.
Oh, okay, all right, okay. But if we didn't entirely answer it, send an email. All right, well,
Can you go back to the previous slide?
so-
Just to say that any questions that you have, you could send an email to the email address on the screen. It's follow up via the email annualmtg@aera.net.
I would have 2 tips. One, read the call for submissions really carefully. And 2, have someone else read your paper who is a constructive critic before you submit. And 3, we want to see you at the annual meeting, either component. We welcome newcomers. We welcome first-time submittees. And we welcome having you a part of our field as we grow, develop, transform, and are maximally inclusive of all forms of scholars and scholarship. And we really appreciate your joining today. And I want to just in particular thank our ASL interpreters, Jonathan Van Gool and Shannon Pippin Manley, and our captioner, David Williams, our voices, Tony Pauls, our Director of Communications, and Kendra McGee, our senior manager, Jude, our assistant director for IT, information technology. And I think we're posting this recording. I'll skip watching it for fear that I don't want to do a redo tomorrow. But we hope it was of help to you and your work. And if so, please encourage others to take a look or pose questions to the annual meeting box. We want the submissions to be strong and broad and responsive to our field and where we're going together. Thank you very much. And we'll see you virtually or in Philadelphia or both. And thanks, Mary.